I think it's possible to like someone, even to love someone, and still try to understand them on a deeper level. In fact, when it comes to trust, understanding often has to come first. That's especially true for political figures, where it's important to not only understand the person themselves, but also the people who follow them. Some figures have a gift for inspiring intense enthusiasm, and that's not necessarily a problem, as long as there are enough people who keep a clear perspective, who aren't swept up by the sheer volume of positive messaging. Elon Musk has undeniably inspired the space community, which has long been eager to see real progress towards humanity's expansion into space.
We will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes.
Many now believe that thanks to Musk and SpaceX, we're finally making meaningful strides towards NASA's top priority, lowering the cost of access to space. But is that really the case? Today, we're going to take a closer look. In the early 2010s, SpaceX, with its Falcon 1 rocket, became the first commercial company to launch a payload in orbit. Shortly after, Elon Musk began promoting the idea of reusable rockets as a way to make spaceflight more affordable. Let's take a look at some of the things he was saying back then.
Rocket from new, how does the SpaceX rocket compare to a rocket from Boeing or Lockheed? It's about a quarter of the price. However, if we make it reusable, then it can be 2 orders of magnitude cheaper.
2 orders of magnitude cheaper, well, 1/100th the price.
That's right.
Cost of a Falcon 9 rocket, which is quite a big rocket. It's about 1 million pounds of thrust. It is the lowest cost rocket in the world, but even so, it's about $50 to $60 million. But the cost of the fuel and oxygen and so forth is only about $200,000. So obviously, if we can reuse the rocket, say 1,000 times, then that would make the capital cost of the rocket per launch only about $50,000. There'd be maintenance and other things that would factor in there, and fixed costs and some overhead allocation and whatnot, but it would allow for about a 100-fold reduction in launch costs.
Now, rockets are a very mature technology, and at the time, even SpaceX's engineers were expecting that reuse of the first stage to result in a cost savings of around 17%. See my previous video for a reference on that.
I visited SpaceX, when this was still conceptual, hadn't been proven yet. And I asked the question, okay, if you reuse the booster, how much money do you actually save? And the answer from the engineer at the time was you save 17%.
Was it possible to reduce the cost of this technology by a factor of 100 with reusability? A site called Our World in Data has some good interactive charts that show how the prices of various technologies has changed over time. For example, the cost for DRAM and hard disk drives is decreasing at the 10x in 5 years rate. DNA sequencing is even faster. But most technologies on this chart are changing at closer to the 10x in 50 years rate. However, there's no data on this chart that shows the cost of space launch. Nevertheless, if we search the internet, we can find lots of charts created by various space enthusiasts. Many of these charts suggest that the cost per kilogram for a space launch to low Earth orbit is going down rapidly, approaching the 10x in 10 years rate. Many of these reference the CSIS Aerospace Security Project as the source of their data. This is the chart from the CSIS Aerospace Security Project. Note that the data is adjusted for inflation. Here's another chart. This one actually states that the cost of launching a spacecraft has dropped by 10x over the last decade. This orange dotted line has a slope of 10x over 10 years to give you an idea what that looks like. But again, the chart references the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So most of these content creators are just engaging in circular reporting, that is, re-reporting what somebody else has already reported. Specifically, they are re-reporting the work of this young author, Thomas G. Roberts. This is the chart from the CSIS report that some of the other articles referenced. If you try to fit a line to this data, you might get a slope of perhaps 10x over 70 years. But these 2 points down here, for the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, are particularly influential when it comes to selecting the best slope for the line. So we really do need to take a closer look at these data points. This is a table of the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and when available, the Starship cost per kilogram values from the previous 5 charts. From this, we can see that within the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy columns, the different charts do not agree with each other. So let's dig a little deeper to see if we can uncover the original source for this information. At least 2 of the other charts reference the CSIS report. So let's take a look at the source that the CSIS chart itself referenced. This is the CSIS Aerospace Security webpage that the other charts referenced. The Falcon 9 data point says that the payload cost of LEO is $2,600 per kilogram, and that the approximate launch cost is $51 to $65 million per launch. The source for this data is the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. This looks like the citation they were referring to. Here we can see that the estimated price per launch for the Falcon 9, which is an estimate, is $61.2 million, and the mass of LEO is 13,150 kilograms. If we go down here, we can see the Falcon Heavy's estimated price per launch is $270 million, and the mass to LEO is 63,800 kilograms. There's an earlier version of this report from 2016 that has similar tables. Here we can see the Falcon 9 prices and payloads are the same as the 2018 table. The Falcon Heavy numbers are slightly different. The price per launch is the same, 270 million, but the payload is slightly less, 53,000 kilograms. If we divide those numbers out and add them to the table that summarizes our launch costs, then we get these values. The 2016 report shows the Falcon 9 cost is actually $4,654 per kilogram, which is much higher than any of the values in our charts. And the Falcon Heavy is $5,094 per kilogram, which is again much higher than any value from the charts. The 2018 report has the same value for Falcon 9, but a slightly lower value for Falcon Heavy of $4,231 per kilogram. Clearly the cost values in the originally referenced material are much higher than the values we are seeing in the previous charts. But most of these charts said that their data was corrected for inflation to the year 2021, and we have not yet applied that correction to the data from the 2016 and 2018 reports. After correcting for inflation to 2021, we see an even more significant difference here. If we correct for inflation to present day, then we get these values. So back in 2016, they estimated that the cost per kilogram for both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy was around $6,000 per kilogram in present day US dollars. Now you may be thinking, how is it that so many articles are reporting lower launch cost numbers? Well, back in 1977, Carl Sagan gave a series of lectures in which he talked about how and why scientists once thought that Venus was a swampy planet inhabited by dinosaurs, and Mars was the home to a canal-building civilization. It's a great lecture, and I'll put a link to it down in the description. But I think that what he said at the end of one of those lectures is still relevant today.
But they also were, to some extent, distorted by our interest in finding life elsewhere. And there is a lesson. The lesson is accept only the most rigorous standards of argument. Do not accept inadequate, poorly thought out, flawed arguments, especially where our emotions are involved.
Now those estimates dating back to 2016 are rather old, so let's see if we can't find some more up-to-date information on the current cost of launch. The SpaceX website provides the cost of a Falcon 9 launch and the payload to various orbits. This is probably a good time to point out that the Falcon 9 has multiple different configurations. There's the return to landing zone configuration, the autonomous drone ship landing version, and the expendable version. There are also two different kinds of engines for the second stage, the long bell and the short bell versions. Let's create a table to help organize the information for all of these configurations. What we're ultimately interested in is the last row, the cost per kilogram to LEO. There's a footnote that tells us that the performance values represent the max capability of a fully expendable vehicle. This tells us that we can add those values to the rightmost column of our table. There is also a price of $69.75 million. Under that price, is a note that says up to 5.5 MT to GEO. MT here probably stands for metric tons. Why are they using metric tons in the footnote and kilograms everywhere else? I don't know. But what this does tell us is that the price is not the price of the expendable configuration, because the payload for the expendable configuration is 8,300 kilograms. What they're probably doing here is using the standard marketing technique of saying prices as low as, which means that the 69.75 million is the price of the lowest cost configuration. So we can enter that price and the payload to GTO in the leftmost column of our table. Now, while it would be incorrect to divide the lowest cost configuration launch cost by the expendable configuration's maximum payload to LEO, if we were to do that, we would end up at a value of $3,170 per kilogram. Even that value is higher than all but one of the Falcon 9 values that we saw on the earlier charts. But if we want an accurate value for cost per kilogram, we will need to have two values in the same column. It would be most helpful to determine the payload to LEO for the lowest cost configuration. Fortunately, SpaceX has released some information that gives us a better indication of this. Presumably they tweeted this information because they were proud of the performance of this particular booster. In this tweet, they revealed that the Falcon 9 system delivered 134 metric tons over 14 missions. From the date of the tweet, we can deduce that they were referring to a booster called B-1071. There is a wiki page that tells us where booster B-1071 landed after each of these 14 flights. From that page, we can tell that 6 of the 14 missions landed at LZ-4, and the rest landed on a drone ship called Of Course I Still Love You. This means that payload data in the tweet represents a 6 to 8 mix of return to landing zone missions and autonomous drone ship landing missions. So this isn't perfect, but it gives us a better indication of what the average payload is for the lower cost configurations. If we divide 134 by 14, we get 9.571 metric tons, or 9,571 kilograms. If we then divide the launch cost by that payload, we arrive at a value of $7,287 per kilogram. However, there's another way we can obtain payload data for the return to landing zone configuration. If we go to NASA's Launch Vehicle Performance website, we can do a performance query. The results of this query suggest that the payload for the return to landing zone configuration is around 12,000 kilograms. If we plug that value into our table and divide the launch cost by payload, we get a value of at least $5,812 per kilogram. However, that's not quite the end of the story. Look at the fine print on NASA's Launch Services Program Launch Vehicle Performance website. We discovered that there's a note that says payload mass greater than 7,250 kilograms may require mission-unique adapter/accommodations, resulting in cost and/or performance impacts. Since both of our payload estimates are well above the 7,250 kilogram threshold, SpaceX, it appears, will apply some kind of surcharge. If we want to avoid that surcharge, then we'll need to keep the payload at or below 7,250 kilograms. And in this case, the cost per kilogram will be $9,621 per kilogram. If you're drafting a business plan that relies on SpaceX as a launch provider, and if you want to be conservative in your estimates, it might be advisable to use this value, at least until you're under NDA with SpaceX and have received a formal quote from them. If we add dots to one of our earlier charts to represent the latest data sourced from SpaceX, and then fit a line to that data, we see that the rate at which the launch cost to LEO is falling is on the order of 2x in 50 years. And that's really a best case estimate. Now, we need to talk about Falcon Heavy. SpaceX's website does not provide a price for the Falcon Heavy anymore. However, if the Falcon Heavy were cheaper than the Falcon 9, then it stands to reason that SpaceX would use the Falcon Heavy to launch their Starlink satellites. However, since they always launch Starlinks with Falcon 9, we can infer from this action that SpaceX does not think they would save money by switching over to the Falcon Heavy for the Starlink launches. In a way, this makes sense, since so far Falcon Heavy missions have always been flown in a configuration where the core stage is expended. Therefore, Falcon Heavy is in practice less reused than Falcon 9. Okay, so let's recap what happened here and why it's important. Back in the early 2010s, Elon Musk led many to believe that reusable rockets would soon bring about a 100th-fold reduction in the cost of launch. It's now been over a decade, and while there is no shortage of claims suggesting substantial cost savings, as we've seen, a careful examination of the available data paints a very different picture. Launch costs are actually decreasing at a rate of roughly 50% every 50 years, worse than the experience curves of many other industries. Along the way, many people wrote articles or produced content that reflected Elon's general optimism, though most did so with more caution and nuance. Still, these ideas were picked up and repeated. Some details got exaggerated or drifted further from their original context. In many cases, sources cited each other, and over time, this created a kind of self-reinforcing cycle where claims appeared increasingly credible simply through repetition. Today, it's common to hear that SpaceX has dramatically lowered the cost of getting to space. That belief is widespread, even embedded in the training data of the language models we consult. But under scrutiny, the foundation of that belief doesn't hold up. What we're seeing isn't solid, independently verified progress in launch costs. It's the accumulation of assumptions, projections, and enthusiasm that have taken on a life of their own. I think it's important that as many people as possible understand this, that they remember the incredibly aspirational claims that Elon made a decade ago, and recognize how social media, along with the broad ecosystem of content creators, was mobilized to turn those aspirational statements into something resembling an unquestioned mass hallucination. It's also important to recognize that there's kind of a dishonesty at the heart of this manipulation. Not necessarily the kind that breaks laws, but the kind that, if left unchecked, can erode the norms and values we depend on to keep our democratic institutions healthy. I hope you found this video thought-provoking. If you did, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss future content. Thanks for watching.